Hi, hold on, let me just check. See, we're rolling. Okay. So, the room I was in, I could not stay in. So, here we go. You, at age 14, decide to go to trade school, and you follow all this stuff. You have to discount mortality, systemic injury risk. So I haven't really talked about what a discount rate is, but a discount rate is cumulative. So each year you're going to discount by a slightly greater amount. So typically the way you look at that is it's an exponential. So it's like T, that's the number of years you're going to multiply by the discount rate and then you're going to do 1 minus this, and then you're going to multiply this total thing by, so this is time in years, this is your rate in years, and then you're going to multiply your future earning by, or you're going to raise your future earnings to that exponent. And then that's gonna, if you sum all of these future earnings from T equals, today to your retirement, you're gonna get the net present value of your future earnings discounted. So one thing we're not really talking about here is this is typically used for inflation, but you can also use a discount rate to account for risk. So net present value just means future earnings are less valuable than present earnings because they're uncertain because of risk. And so we're going to account for that by taking our future earnings and raising them to an exponent. And if we take all of those annual earnings and then discount them, we'll get a net present value of that course of action. So in this case, mortality risk is going to be the most, it's going to be the thing we're most concerned with. So since every course of action you choose has a mortality risk, you don't need to really compute a net present value, because the net present value isn't as meaningful as the relative net present value. So in this case, the net present value will be based mostly on your earnings, because every career track is going to have mortality rates or mortality risk. So I would say you don't really need to concern yourself too much with this unless you see some type of risk having a major impact on your discount rate, which in this case, I think because your labor is pretty secure, you don't really need to do as much. So we're going to talk about some careers that do carry some risk next. So let's say you instead choose a traditional public school, or I'll just say traditional high school. And then you're going to go to the military. All right, so from the military, you can have a military career. You can then retire and then work in a civilian career, and then retire again. We'll call this one retirement. This civilian career can also include a military contractor. And it can potentially include an intelligence agency. Okay, so traditional high school has no more risk than a trade school, but the military is going to have a huge amount of mortality risk. So in those future earnings that you're going to talk about in these potential futures, you're going to have to more heavily discount them. And that's going to give you a lower net present value than you would get if you got a trade school career. But remember, we're not just trying to maximize future earnings, we're trying to maximize our quality of life. So, since this involves service, although you have a lower net present value of earnings, you know, the big draw here is that you'll be able to be more of service and you'll be in better shape, so you'll have a better quality of life in that regard. And so even though there's a discount of the net present value of earnings, you could say it's worth it because you'll have a better quality of life. And then the retirement benefits from the military are insanely good. And then you can have another career afterwards where you get more retirement benefits. You can work for extremely lucrative companies, or I should say agencies, afterwards. So despite the fact that there's a mortality risk, there's a much higher risk of injury, some aspects of being in the military are valuable. So I just wanted to talk about kind of those. This is just a choice anyone can face. And depending on how you evaluate those things, the earnings are one thing you can evaluate, and then the other thing you're going to evaluate is how it's going to influence your quality of life. So this is probably someone who's going to be more service. This is more of like a service-oriented choice. I mean, not everybody is going to be doing this. Like, not everybody is Admiral Byrd. And someone who goes into trade school is probably making a more, let's say, utility choice, where they want their education to be of guaranteed utility in the future. So the next couple ones I'm going to do are going to be working for the government. You can also work for like the post office. You can work as a teacher for the government. You know, there's a variety of career tracks you can have, and then most of these all lead to the same place, which is just government pension. And there's going to be more training if you want to be a teacher. I'm just kind of skipping around here. But you're going to also face more risk of systemic issues in society. So these careers don't have mortality and injury risk, but they have a greater systemic risk of the government essentially changing your career track for you. You can also work, you can get healthcare training. And then you can become a doctor. You know, that's a pretty desirable choice. You can become a doctor or a nurse. You can become an administrator if you're lucky, or work in some aspect of healthcare. And then again, ultimate goal is retirement. So for this one, you're pretty much not looking at anything except systemic risk here, which is that healthcare inflation is going to be a major issue for people who work in healthcare. So I would say this can be a path of service. Most of these can be paths of service, but they can also be paths where you just are looking for stability. And the only reason there is systemic risk in healthcare is because of healthcare inflation, which I may have to talk about in my next video. I'm just going to check my time. Oh no, I'm about to run out of time. Okay, so there's a lot of choices you're going to make, and then you're going to have to evaluate the net present value. And I haven't really gotten to the uncertainty or evaluating how they impact your quality of life. But I'm just trying to point out there are different choices you're making over time in your education that are going to shape what opportunities you have. And those choices are going to be best evaluated if you understand what risks there are and what future earnings will be available to you, and what commonly motivates people in those fields. So this is kind of like a lighter video. I didn't really get to what some of these risks even are, or what even the variety of choices you have in your education. Really quickly, I'm just going to say that independence is going to, none of these are independent paths, except trade school can be somewhat independent. But even then, your apprenticeship, once you're past your apprenticeship, then you have some independence here. But let's say you value independence. One of the things you're not going to be looking at is most of these careers, because you're always going to be subservient to finance, or in the case of the military, the command structure. So if you value independence, you're most likely going to pursue something where you can be in control of the capital gains, because capital gains accrue faster than labor. So if you want to be independent, you're probably going to have to work with capital at some point and be a capitalist, whether or not that's you just employing yourself, starting a business, a farm, a school, whatever it is. People who pursue independence are going to value that. But that independence comes with much more systemic risk, because obviously the government is not going to stop using teachers in the post office and the military. But if you want to be independent, there's